The history of the pyramids basically started in Sudan, where everybody thinks it's in Egypt.
There was tons of them.
We had breakfast in the desert. I looked towards your tent and it was flattened, doing a kind of Spider-Man thing on the floor.
Sarah, are you okay? I think that's a journey I'll never forget.
I was ready to fake an emergency and get medevaced out of the country.
You said you went to Sudan. Did you mean to say that?
Went into fight mode. And I hope we're still friends at the end of this. So welcome. This is Bantering Across Borders. And we are two best friends who between us have been to over 100 countries. And we are going to be looking back at our trips, reminiscing about random escapades and sharing some of our highs and lows. All the while unpacking what it means for us to still be friends. And I hope we're still friends at the end of this podcast
I'm sure we will.
as well. All right, so tell us, Tony, where are we going to today?
Today we're going to Sudan.
Sudan?
Sudan. Indeed we are, to Sudan.
The Republic of Sudan, right?
Yes, because there's two. That's right, there are two Sudans.
Exactly.
There's
So
Sudan and South Sudan.
it's the Republic of Sudan and then South Sudan.
South Sudan, yeah.
And Sudan used to be the biggest country in Africa, actually, up until 2011 when they split into the two countries.
That's right. It's now the third largest country in Africa after DCR, Democratic Congo Republic, and what's the other one? Algeria.
Okay, yeah, I think Algeria.
Yeah. Algeria and DCR. Haven't been to either of those two yet.
Put it on the list.
And it's actually the 16th largest country in the world.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, that surprises me.
Yes, and me too, after Indonesia, which again I found quite interesting. I didn't think Indonesia was that big.
No, and also it's made up of a load of islands, right? So it's...
Someone with a calculator worked out.
Fair enough. But other interesting things about Sudan for people who don't really sort of know where it is geographically. It's the northeast of Africa, so just below Egypt and above Eritrea and Ethiopia and across the Red Sea from Saudi Arabia, actually.
If you're English, think Newcastle.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And it's full of deserts, right? There's the Nubian desert and there's the, I think it's called the Libyan desert as well. And the capital, which is where we started our trip, was in Khartoum. And still is in Khartoum today. Yeah.
So in last week's episode of Bantering Across Borders, we were in Azerbaijan, where we visited a carpet museum.
And you got very excited.
I did, and I'm still excited about the carpet museum. I recommend everybody goes to see it. If you go to Azerbaijan, do nothing but go to the carpet museum. And then, of course, visit the village up in Zinikokwik or something.
Yeah,
Zinik, yeah, up in the mountains, which is on the way to Russia, which obviously is a hotbed of activity these days. So you need to check that one out. Just on that, Azerbaijan was the first trip that Sarah and I did with Escape Travel.
So our friends at Escape Travels have kindly offered to give everyone a discount who books one of their tours. So stick around till the end, and we'll be revealing the codes and more information. So why did we decide to go to Sudan?
Interesting question.
Do you remember?
I don't actually remember. I think it was one of those things where we were doing our usual, which is, have you been there? Yeah, I've been there. Have you been there? No, I've been there. Have you been there? What about Sudan? Oh, that sounds interesting. And I think that was how we landed on Sudan.
Yeah, I also can't really remember. I think that was also the way that we decided to go. And then a friend of mine who you also know,
oh, that's right.
Kevin,
yeah,
he'd actually been to Sudan,
yeah.
And he recommended this hotel. So that it's called the Acropole Hotel in Khartoum, and we took his recommendation basically and worked through them, and they arranged everything for us. What I didn't realize at the time, and I wish I did know, but the Acropole Hotel is actually one of the oldest hotels in the whole of Khartoum. Today, it's still a place where a lot of the government folk go, the archaeologists go there as well. So they were really good to us. It's acropolechartoum.com, I think. and they arranged basically the city tour, and we stayed with them, and then we also went on to see the pyramids afterwards.
And there's that whole controversy as to who did the pyramids first.
Exactly.
Was it the Egyptians or was it the Sudanese? Or because Egypt occupied, I don't like the word invaded, but they occupied Sudan for a while, didn't they?
Yeah, for a very long time. It was also, I think, Egypt and Turkey together when it was part of the Ottoman Empire, I think. I mean, I'm not the expert on that, but yes.
I got unclassified for history.
Unclassified GCSE in history.
O-levels, darling, O-level.
Oh, O-levels. means you turned up.
Yeah.
But yes, you're right. There's this big controversy, which I didn't realize until we were in Sudan. And on our first stop, basically, we went to the National Museum in Sudan, and they start talking to us about how the pyramids the history of the pyramids basically started in Sudan, right? Yeah. Where everybody thinks it's in Egypt. And I don't know what the answer is, and I don't think we need to get into that discussion. I know all my Egyptian friends would really disagree with the fact that they started in Sudan, but I think the theory from the Sudanese is that the pyramid started in Sudan, and then the skill set traveled towards Egypt, whereas the Egyptians say it started in Egypt, and then the skill set traveled to Sudan. I think the interesting thing is that, for people who have the Egyptian pyramids in mind, in Sudan, it's completely different, right? They've not really been preserved, but also I think even if they were preserved, you can see they are a sort of a more basic form. That's an interesting argument that you literally get hit with on the first day of
I think
of
it's one of those reasons that you actually need to go there to see it for yourself, because I think anyone who's been to Sudan and seen the pyramids in, where is it, Meru, yeah. Meru. If you see the pyramids in Meru and then you go to the pyramids in Egypt, I think you know who started first.
Exactly. But let's maybe talk about our trip. So as we said, the Acropole Hotel, they arranged everything for us. They gave us a guide to do a city tour. And do you remember going to the city? I think we went first to the National Museum, right?
Yeah,
Sudan's National Museum.
Yeah. That was an amazing place, actually. I one of the things I like most about national museums, particularly in this region, is you get a feel for how the country is evolving, because the artifacts that they have in place, a lot of them you can imagine them from 50s TV or 40s TV, and the real thing is there in front of you, is something that these people have lived through as well. But they've also kept it as a kind of a place marker for how their countries have evolved. So old Ovaltine containers,
right.
And the old Bush radios and things like that. So the National Museum, and I think they had a car in there. I can't remember a couple of cars in there, and from the old colonists. And I found it really, really enjoyable just being in there, looking at that old stuff, obviously not touching it, but you look at it and you see it, and then you can see how the country has developed and grown to where it currently is. I think the other thing that I found as well was it was more modern. You thought it was modern, the National Museum? I thought the museum and the surroundings of the museum were actually modern. Compared to the view of Africa, streets of Khartoum and stuff. Yeah. And compared to, and I know it's a horrible thing to say, but we have this view of Africa which is all mud huts and villages, but then you get there and you realise, as bad as the colonists were in all of the countries they went to, the architectural heritage that they've put in many of those places is sometimes it's absolutely incredible. Yeah. I remember the National Museum being very quite big, actually, and there was even grounds outside. Do you remember? Because they had that little what we called the mini Burj Al Arab. Yes. There was this building that was behind the museum and literally looked like it was that's one of my favourite pictures, a mini version of the Burj Al Arab. Yeah, that's one of my favourite pictures from the trip, is that the Burj Al Arab in the background, but actually no, it's not, because we're in Sudan. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And do you remember finding the used condom in the grounds of the museum? I'm taking it low. Going there early, but we were walking around outside, right? In they've got some
preservation of some
heritage buildings. And yes, it's interesting what you find when you look. Not that's what we were looking for, and we left that behind. But it was a revelation, and it was good to see that they take birth control seriously.
Exactly. Historians get excited, but
talking about birth control, I mean the population over there is nice sort of segue.
Nice segue.
49 million.
49 million?
Yeah, 49 million. And as of October 24, it was apparently 24.7 million male, 24.3 million female.
Okay.
And I don't think I've seen anywhere where the gender split has been 50-50.
Yeah,
Everybody always
true.
talks about 50-50, and it's almost straight down the middle. It's amazing from that perspective. So that was interesting. From a work perspective as well, I mean, average salary is $600 a month. Yeah, $600 a month, which is reasonable, but actually the cost of living is $900 a month. So, you're in negative straight away. But the salary is quite significant in terms of, agriculture is the main industry there, and salaries in agriculture can be down to $120 a month. Whereas as you become more experienced, more educated, more advanced, and move into other industries, your salaries can actually, quadruple. And particularly for expats, they tend to have a little bit of an easier time there from a salary perspective and a cost of living perspective.
One of the things that surprised me actually was how expensive it was. You go in thinking that it's a cheap trip, to be quite honest, but because of the sanctions and because it's difficult to import in a lot of things. If you're looking to do any kind of official tour or stay in kind of any level of hotel, then it actually becomes, I thought at least, it was quite expensive compared to what I anticipated it to be.
The cost of living for them is actually quite high. It's quite, everything is expensive. And for us, when we go over there, we think we're going to get a lot for our money.
Right.
But like you say, everything costs a lot.
Yeah.
And to travel around there costs a lot. I mean, petrol's not particularly expensive. It's half the price of the US. I mean, it's $1 for a litre of petrol there versus $2.50 in the US. So petrol's not that expensive. But when your monthly salary is $600 and a litre of petrol is $1, that's a major outlay. So it's an interesting place from that perspective.
Yeah, so it's all about the context, really.
Yeah.
So let's go back to our trip. So
Yes.
we started off at the Sudan National Museum, and then if I remember correctly, because we had a car and a tour guide for the day, right? So if I remember correctly, we then went on what they call the Nile Road, and we saw the boat, or the remains of the boat of Lord Kitchener.
Yes.
Do you remember that?
Yes, I did, and it's still there, up on sticks. It's almost like being in Liverpool, but it's sorry for the Brits. Don't mean to be so derisive, but anyway, so the boat was up on bricks, but and they've turned it into a cafe. I think it was.
There is a cafe there, if I remember right.
But the boat for me was kind of like, oh wow, that's there, slap bang in the middle of town. And it was, a bit of history again.
Yeah, it's absolutely a bit of history. Excuse me. It is a bit of history. It's on the edge of the Nile, right? I think it's on the edge of the Blue Nile.
As is Khartoum itself, because it's on the join of the Blue Nile and the White Nile, which I have to admit, before I got to Sudan, I didn't know there were two Niles. In fact, I didn't even know they were colour-coded.
Now you do.
I assumed the Nile was the Nile, full stop, but there you go.
After the boat visit, we went to Khalifa's house. Do you remember that?
I do. Even back then, you could see the opulence. And I always try to imagine what it must be like when you see people who have that level of wealth, and how it must be when you see them walking through town or coming through town, or, going and you see their house. Because we look at their house now and it's surrounded by other buildings, whereas at the time, it would have been standalone.
Yeah, exactly.
So I thought it was an amazing place, great place to visit.
Yeah, and it was full of details and artifacts of the time. It was of the last 2 decades of the 1800s. Al Khalifa Al Mahdi is the person who owned that house, and as you say, it was very, very opulent because he was one of the leaders. His tomb is directly next door.
Yes.
To it, which is massive, right? The tomb is even bigger than his house.
Yeah. Mausoleum.
The mausoleum. And we had an amazing lady guide as well. Do you remember? The one advice I wanted to give is that it's always good if you're going around those national museums or any of these houses to take a local guide, I think, or
definitely,
to take someone who knows the history a little bit more, because you just get so much more out of it.
There's a passion.
Right, exactly.
There's a passion in the stories that they're telling you about the places and the artifacts that you're seeing and the history behind it all.
And then the next day, so we had a very, very quick trip to Sudan. We do this a lot. We tend to sort of fly in and fly out and get an overview of the country, really with a sense at some stage, I think, to sort of go back. But then the next day, we headed off on a what was supposed to be, I think, a 4-hour road trip to Meru or Mero. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but to the pyramids, to the Sudanese pyramids, right?
Yes.
Do you remember that?
Very much so. I think that's a journey I'll never forget.
Because in the end, I think it was like 7-8 hours in the car.
It was
because the car
time.
broke down, right?
Yeah.
The car broke down on the way.
Yeah.
And we were stranded somewhere or the other waiting for parts at some stage.
Yeah.
And then we eventually arrived in what I thought was quite a remote area where the pyramids are. It was just us and the driver and one guide, if I remember. There was 4 of us in the car. Yeah,
there was 4 of us. One of them was he was the chef, wasn't he? Really. So basically, what we when we got to the site, the driver basically he was putting together the tents that we were going to stay in. Your tent and my tent. I think we should have a picture of that somewhere. But your tent and my tent. And then while the chef was putting together the food, and we were basically just sitting there. And as you say, remote. I remember we drove for, like you said, probably 5-6 hours, and we'd only seen about 10 people in the whole time. And the last group we saw was probably about an hour before we got to the campsite, which I didn't even know it was going to be a campsite.
Well, it wasn't really a campsite. It was a space.
I was being generous. A site that we camped on, and it was interesting in that we had the chef doing what he was doing, the guy doing what he was doing, putting together the tents, and then we were just sitting on those 2 chairs by the table, waiting for the food to turn up, and then the lights started to go down. It started to get dark.
Yeah, nice sunset. Stars are coming out.
Stars are coming out, and he's put the fire together and cooking the food. And then we sat down, and then suddenly, out of nowhere, these 2 guys just wandered over the top of the dune. Where did they come from?
Like random folks just walking along the desert.
Yeah.
Walking in the desert.
And it was incredible. And I think it turned out that one of them owned that area.
Came to see what we were doing.
Yeah, came to see what was happening. And it was like we literally were in the middle of nowhere.
And at some stage, I realised in the morning, because they were still there in the morning, that they had camels with them, right? But we didn't see the camels. I don't know. They parked them behind one of the sand dunes, I think.
They parked the camels.
Because that would have made more sense. If I'd have seen guys turn up on a camel, you'd think, okay, they've travelled here on a camel. But there was nothing. There was no car. There was no camel. Just 2 guys turning up really to join our meal as well, right? Without really sort of introducing themselves. They just sat down.
They just sat down, had a chat, and then after a while they got up and they disappeared into the darkness, which was disturbing, but it was like, fair enough. They came from nowhere, they went to nowhere, fine.
Exactly.
Move on.
Yeah, exactly.
And then there was the night.
Yes, the night. So it was lovely, right? At the beginning, it was, there's all of the stars in the sky. We've got this campfire, and we decided to go to bed, like to our tents. And I parked myself a little bit more uphill to you. I
Yeah, your
think.
tent was about 20 meters, 30 meters further, slightly up the slope from where my tent was.
Yeah, exactly. And then you were a little bit downhill, and we went to bed, and then there was this massive sandstorm.
Yes. Yeah. And I have to admit, I was terrified because it sounded like somebody was trying to get into the tent.
Yes.
And having gone through that experience of the two randoms from nowhere who'd arrived and then disappeared, and then suddenly there's this beating on the tent.
Because we were asleep, right? Like, I think we'd gone to sleep, and then the storm must have started maybe like 2 or 3 hours after we were sleeping.
Yeah.
And as you said, the wind was battering the tents, like someone was trying to get into it.
Yeah. And so I went into my Superman, come on, bring yourself in. You see what's going to happen to you if you get in here. And then I remember shouting.
You went into fight mode.
And I remember shouting across to you, Sarah, are you okay? And he was like, yeah, I'm okay. I was thinking, right, she's okay. So at least no one's attacking her. If they get in here, it's going to be it. And then, I don't know, then it calmed down a bit.
And I was I was also very, very frightened. But for another reason, I didn't think I was being attacked. I thought that the tent was going to be swept up in some kind of like Wizard of Oz style, like whirlwind, you know? I was really thinking that the whole thing with me in it was going to be pulled up and sucked into this, because it felt like a tornado, you know? So I took the step of opening my tent door, which apparently is not the right thing to do, because then the wind just comes in now.
Yep.
And lifts it up even further. But I was taking my bags and stones and rocks and anything I could find, and just like literally surrounding myself with heavy things, and, you know, doing a kind of Spider-Man thing on the floor to hold the tent down, because I really thought I was going to be whisked away in it. So yeah, that was really scary. Actually, it's I've camped quite a lot, and I, you know, including in the desert, and I've never ever been in a sandstorm like that before.
I'm not a big one for camping. We did it when we were at school, but I've never been a big one for camping. It's too many creatures out there. But yeah, I was more terrified that we were being attacked and I was going to have to go out and fight people and protect your honor. and then it calmed down, and then that was it. We went back to sleep, and eventually went back to sleep. And then the next morning, that was hilarious. But when you came and knocked on my tent door.
Well, that was the thing. This is the thing that I learned about you in Sudan, is that you can sleep through anything. Like once you're asleep, you are in such a deep sleep. Because as you said, in the morning after the sandstorm, like I woke up, I was the first up, so I got out of my tent and I looked towards your tent and it was flattened. It was literally flattened.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, well, where's Tony? I was thinking, well, he must have got up and gone to sleep in the Jeep. But as I was walking towards your tent, I could like see the outline, you know, like this sort of murder scene, like see the outline of you like squashed between the tent that had collapsed around you, and you were sleeping. You had just slept. I mean, after the big part of the storm, you'd just gone straight back to sleep, slept through it all, even as the tent collapsed around you.
Well, you know, when
I couldn't believe it, and then I had to poke you. I thought you might have died. I was like, Tony.
I've always said it. When I go to bed, I go to sleep.
Yeah.
That's it, and I sleep. But anyway, yeah, no, that was quite terrifying. And but yeah, in the end, it was a nice memory.
Yeah, and then the next morning, we actually had. This is my favorite part of the trip. I think we had the breakfast in the desert, and we then went on a camel ride around, again, the camels that suddenly appeared from nowhere. We went on a camel ride around the actual pyramids themselves, actually.
Yeah, and they were quite small, actually. I mean, it's not like when you go to the Valley of whatever it is, the Valley of the Kings in Egypt, where there's huge structures there. These were very, very, but there was tons of them. It was literally, I mean, there must have been 20, 30.
Yeah, you could see them all across the landscape, right?
Yeah, and they were so many different sizes and shapes, mainly squarish. Maybe cubes, more cubes. There was no pyramids, but it was amazing. So I really think, I think there was some good work that was done by the Egyptians and the Sudanese in pyramid design.
What I've learned since is that, because we went in 2017, actually, we should probably have said that at the beginning. So it's been a while since we went there. What I've learned since is that they've done a lot more excavation and preservation. And so I think if we went back, there's many more sites to visit, actually, from the pyramids and from the sort of artifacts of that region. So,
and hopefully better camel parking and tent construction. Yeah, definitely. But no, it was really good. So I mean, I would say if one gets the chance to go to Sudan, that would be worthwhile going and doing, and just. Well, no, I think you have to do it. If you go to Sudan, you have to go and see the pyramids.
Absolutely, yeah. It's definitely achievable if you're flying into Khartoum. You can do both sort of in the weekend, and if you want to have a longer stay, to go to Meru. And that whole region there, then there's a lot more to see now. We probably should mention, actually, because we went in 2017, obviously today and in the last sort of 18 months, Sudan is in crisis again. According to the UN, I think it's like 11 million people displaced. And I think it's a good time to give our disclaimer, actually, that everything that we say in our podcast is based on our own experiences and our own insights. Obviously, if you're going to travel yourself, do your due diligence, look up on your government websites, and and then decide for yourself whether you plan to go. And go anyway.
Go. As long as you've got insurance, go. I mean, I think the world is too small. And the other thing I always say to people is, don't take my word for it. Go and see it with your own two eyes.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you're fit enough and able enough, go and see it with your own two eyes and make your own judgments based on being there and being open when you're there. Yeah. So, what surprised you the most about Sudan?
So the thing that surprised me the most was, first of all, the pyramids, because I really did not know that whole discussion around, there are more pyramids in Sudan than there are in Egypt, etc. The other thing that surprised me was, to be quite honest, how much rubbish there was. If you remember the journey, particularly from Khartoum out towards the pyramids, there's a lot of rubbish. And I mean, I've traveled quite a lot in East Africa, and I think I was expecting it to be a little bit more like that. And it wasn't. There was just lots of rubbish. So I think that was the most surprising thing, and also the expense of it. I was not anticipating it was going to be so expensive. But what about you? What surprised you the most?
I thought the people were extremely friendly and welcoming. The Acropole Hotel was, I mean, when we went there, it was the hotel we'd been recommended to go to, but then once you've been there, you've read the history of it. It's amazing that the actual history of that hotel. So I thought that was great. And I remember when we arrived in town and we pulled up outside the hotel, actually, and I remember looking at it and thinking to myself, you actually felt the history of it. I mean, obviously, I was looking more for a Sofitel or a Hilton, but this was, for a local hotel, you actually could feel that there was something to it more than just being there. So, but like I say, the friendliness of the people. The driver was, I mean, he did his best.
They were a good laugh. They took everything with humour, right?
Yeah. And our music, they enjoyed listening to our music as well.
Yeah, so as usual, we managed to, I think probably with Bluetooth, connect both of our iPhones so that we had our own playlist, which is imperative on every single road trip that we ever go on.
Definitely. Yeah. So Sudan was really good from that perspective. And again, one of the things that really did surprise me was the mini Burj Al Arab.
Mini Burj Al Arab.
Yeah, that was just because we were in the museum. I remember we were in the museum, and it was there where they had put together constructions from different places around Sudan, the historical places around Sudan, and we were in one of those. And I remember we came out, and that was when you thought, hang on a second. And
Yeah,
it was almost like we time traveled back to Dubai.
It's a very sort of modern building in the midst of some things that were very, very historical.
Yeah.
So the big friendship question, I told you already one thing that I learned about you on the trip, which is that you can sleep through anything. And I really, really wish I had that skill set.
Yeah.
What did you learn about me on that trip, or what did you learn about our friendship?
Well, the thing I learned about you is your independence.
And why do you say that?
Because you seem, I mean, it was like, as I say, when the two guys turned up and, you know, we were having dinner, and then we had dinner, and then the two guys wandered off into the desert, or maybe they didn't. And then you said, well, I'm going to bed now. And you just wandered off to your tent. And I thought, okay, fair enough. Off you go. But I'm worried because there's two randoms wandering around. And off you went. And then again, when the storm was buffeting the tent and everything, and you know, and I was thinking, I've got to protect her. Sarah, you okay? Yeah, I'm fine. How are you fine? There's madness going on out. It's like, all right.
And I wasn't fine. I was like this in the tent, like trying to hold everything down.
Yeah, I'm fine. I'm fine. But yeah, I think that was one of the things I learned, is that you are fiercely independent.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, that's a very true fact. The other thing that I learned about you on the trip is that I think you have the patience of a saint. I remember that road trip when we broke down, right? I was ready to fake an emergency and get medevaced out of the country. I did not want to wait on our trip, and you were just fine, right? You were just chatting to people and walking around, and I was just in a foul mood.
We have many incidences of where that has occurred on our trips.
That's true. Yeah, I do not have any patience, but I say you have patience until a fly comes along, and then you completely lose it. So that was the other thing I learned.
Me and creatures
on that on the camping part of our trip, that you can see like an imaginary fly from
not imaginary.
There were no flies.
They're not imaginary. Just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's not there. If it's there, I will see it.
Yeah,
like the one that's in the studio that pops out every now and again
from behind my head.
From behind you. Yeah. I'll get him before we go.
So what did you like the most about our trip, would you say? Is there a favourite moment?
I think favourite moment, I'd say the randomness of it. And I mean, I don't even think it's that trip. I think it's the theme for all the trips that we do on. It's the randomness of them, you know, and it's the randomness and the openness of them. I mean, Sudan. Well, we'll talk about Djibouti. What was the other one? Djibouti was the one in. I mean, Somalia. Oh, God, we sound like. I hope there's no Americans listening. Talking about that.
Yeah, talking about which.
Talking about that. But yeah, I think it's the randomness of the places that we go to, and the ability to just go.
Yeah.
You know, so I enjoy that.
So do you want to talk about the specifics about Sudan for people's visas and the consequences of traveling?
So that's one of the things we mentioned earlier on, which is around before you go anywhere, make sure you check. To be frank, I didn't check about the consequences of going to Sudan. I just checked on the visa requirements to get into Sudan, and we did all of that. And as you said, Acropole Hotel, they managed all of that for us. 2018, I was supposed to go on holiday somewhere in America. And I had to apply for my ESTA, being British and having the European passport at that time. And it was a big when they asked you the question, have you been to all of these countries? And Sudan was on the list. And straight away, literally, red flashing lights came up on the screen to say, you said you went to Sudan. Did you mean to say that? And it was like, yes. And it was like, well, no, ESTA's revoked.
And that is why, because Sudan is one of these countries that are exempted or on a banned list.
There's a list. It's there's countries that I can't remember what they call it now. It's dropped off my head. But
axis of evil.
Yeah. No, there's just certain countries that are on the list, and if you need to get a visa, if you need to go to the US, most Europeans can just go online and get an ESTA. But there's a list of countries where they say if you've been to any of these, then you basically have to, well, effectively they just don't give you an ESTA. And you will, if you want a visa, you actually have to go and have an interview at the American embassy in your country. I'm not sure if it's still on the list because it came off. But I think it came off, but I think because of the recent problems that they're having, it might have gone back on again.
Yeah, so there's a few countries like that. I think like Iran's on it, Yemen's on it. So if you go to those countries, it just makes it more difficult to go to America, particularly America, afterwards.
Yeah.
All right, so any other tips and tricks?
It's predominantly Islamic country. So the same rules apply around if you're a foreigner, basically modesty. Respect the local customs, respect the local traditions. You don't have to cover, you don't have to wear, as a woman, you don't have to wear an abaya. But basically, you just have to be respectful. You know, you're not going to a disco on the beach. It's not Ibiza. Don't assume they will take your currency.
Yes. They don't, when we were there, they didn't take credit cards either. It was cash only.
It was cash only.
In currency.
Yeah.
And cash as in euros and dollars.
Yeah.
Not local currency.
Yeah. They were very keen to have they were very keen to have euros and dollars.
Yes.
You know, I don't think anybody was keen to see the sterling.
So would you go again?
Definitely. I'm also tempted to go to South Sudan, but we'll leave that for another day. But yeah, I'd definitely go back to Khartoum. And I'd definitely go out into the desert again. But next time I'd be a bit more prepared. You know, hunting knife.
You don't need a hunting knife.
Sturdy tent, bulletproof vest, crash helmet just in case the tent collapses. No, I would definitely go back out there again. I think it's a great place. I think. And you? What about you? What happened?
Yeah, I would go again. I would explore the pyramid section more because I believe now there's more to see. And in all honesty, I probably would have read up a little bit more about the country and the history before I went, because although I learned a lot when I was there and I enjoyed the trip, I think in retrospect, we flew in and then we flew out. And I think if I'd have known a little bit more about the history, I would have got more out of some of those sites that we went to visit. I went in completely uneducated, to be honest, when we visited Sudan.
Yeah, but you say that, and I think that's one of the recurring themes about the trips that we have been on. I mean, we've been on a number of different countries. And I would challenge you on any of the countries that we've been to, how much research you've done before we've got on the plane.
That's true.
You know, because I think that's part of the joy is getting there and it's like, really? Oh, I didn't know that. You know, and and we've been to some very developed countries and we've been to some developing countries, but it's always been the same. It's, you turn up at the airport, you get on the plane, you get off at the other end, and let's take it from here.
And I think as long as you've booked a local guide, there's typically in some of these places that we've gone to, there's typically only one or two guides that are locals and that have been recommended. So it's relatively easy to find them. I normally start with toursbylocals.com. That's actually quite a good website.
Okay.
And then, check the reviews on Google and on TripAdvisor.
And I think our tour guide as well he'd done some archaeological. That word.
He did an archaeological degree, I think.
Yeah. So he was well into that stuff as well. So we promised you at the start that we'd give you a discount code for Escape Travels. It's escape-travels.com, and they're offering a discount on any trips that are booked between now and the end of June of this year. The discount code is K for Kilo, F for Foxtrot, Y for Yankee, E for Echo, P for Papa, L for Lima, Q for Quebec, and P for Papa. It's a 5% discount. It should pop up on the screen so you can copy it down or freeze frame or whatever you do to screen grab. But check escape-travels.com and they've got some great trips coming up in there.
Yeah, amazing ones, right? We were just looking at it. Burundi, Libya, Afghanistan, Vietnam, all over the place. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah. Okay.
Nice. So, final words on Sudan, I think, is recommend you go. Maybe
Definitely.
wait until it's a little bit more peaceful again. But go and see the people of Sudan. They are very happy, very friendly. There's a huge amount of history there. Huge amount of history, and yeah, I think if you go, you'll uncover a new perspective on that part of the world.
Definitely.
So that's all for today's episode on Sudan, and it's actually the final episode in series 1. If you missed the previous episodes of Bantering Across Borders, do check them out. We went from Saudi Arabia to Sudan via South Korea, Kuwait, Djibouti, Azerbaijan. So do check them out.
Okay, and series 2, we're looking forward to filling you in on our further exploits of Bantering Across Borders. So we look forward to seeing you then, and dates for that will be coming up soon.
Yep, I'm looking forward to seeing you on yet more trips.